My name is Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. If you've never talked to us before, if you're not familiar with us, our team ran hundreds of routes across the country in both P&D and line haul. And today, we're really here to do a couple of things. One, if you're a current contractor, we want this to continue to be a place where we can come together. You can find out about what's happening in the industry, find better ways to be successful, to optimize with all the crazy changes that FedEx likes to throw at us. And if you're trying to figure out if this is the right space for you, if you're trying to get into this for the first time, we want to continue to have this be a place where you can come and ask questions, get educated, and really find out if this is the right fit for you or not. Now, if you're here every week, welcome back. We're always happy to have you back. And whether you are brand new or you're here every week, we always, like I said, want these webinars to be a place where everyone can come and learn and ask questions. And so we'll have time for all of that. Before I go any farther, I do have a quick disclaimer to read, as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. So format of today, if you haven't been here, the way we'll do it is we'll go through some new content, some things that we want to talk about that are happening this week that we're hearing in the community. Then we'll go over any of our new listings for this week. And then after that, we will open it up for pure Q&A. So any questions you have, whether it's about something we talk about today or anything that's happening, especially as we head into peak season, if you have any of those burning questions before the volume hits, now's a good time to ask it. If you do have those questions, though, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the window. That's the best place to put the question. If you try to put it anywhere else, I might miss it. So if you want to have those questions answered, you can type it into that Q&A button at the bottom at any time, and then we will get to those at the end of the session today. So like I just mentioned, we are just a few weeks, days really away from Black Friday, and then peak volume really and truly hits after that. And I think we all know that in a perfect world, all of those boxes that we get would be tiny little envelopes or shoebox size packages. But we know that is not reality in the FedEx network in particular. So you are going to have some very large packages that can completely tank your capacity and your efficiency if you're not planning for it properly. Bulk volume is a part of this model, and it's a part of this model that a lot of people struggle with. So what we wanted to do today is just talk a little bit about it and talk about having kind of the proper strategy for how to handle it. And we have, of course, brought on Amy and Dave Byers to give their perspective and talk us through it. So Amy and Dave, I see you there. Why don't you go ahead and say hi and we'll get into it.
Hi, I'm Dave, president of Slicker Trucking. We've been a contractor for 18 years, and we are in the P&D, line haul, and custom critical space.
And I'm Amy Byers, Dave's wife. I joined him about 7 years ago when we dove into line haul and needed kind of full-time office infrastructure. So I kind of jumped in that regard, and we manage all of the lines of business together.
Perfect. So I introed it, but I think it would be helpful, especially if people don't know what we're talking about at all, to just give a little bit of definition and context on what it even means when we say a large package. Like, what does that mean for FedEx?
Can we have that one?
Yeah. So a large package is anything that pretty much takes up space on your truck that is labeled with a FL, which is usually a floor load, and oversized weight, dimensions, just anything that we see that plugs that truck up.
So FedEx, or actually on your I guess MyGroundBiz, will give you a minimum definition. We used to have maximums, and we don't have maximums anymore. It's as big as they want to ship, as big as they want to contract with, even if it says 2-man or machine load or whatever it says. So there are minimums that are on your historical LP screen in your MyGroundBiz. If you go in and look at that, it's anything more than 50 pounds, anything that has a length of this, that has a girth times length of that. So it has very specific criteria for the minimum of what it qualifies to be an LP. But when we talk about bulk, it's not just large packages, it's also multi-package stops, right? So if you have a box that's 12 by 12 by 12, but you have 30 of them, that might be a stop that you want to move over to either a bulk route or something like that. But that is also bulky, right? Even though it's not, you know, a couch or a love seat or a love sack or a refrigerator or a bike or a TV or any of the large things that normally ship at the holidays. It could be a lot of small items going to the same stop. So that's also, you know, what you would consider something like a stop that takes up a bunch of cube in your truck. So I think that's the best way to you know, kind of explain what that looks like.
Yeah, well, can you just, if you were to think back, what's the largest package you guys have gotten?
Oh,
We-
the other day, so the other day we got a tire that the lady that delivered it is probably 5 foot tall, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, and she was inside the tire, like standing inside the well. And this is actually an interesting one. I think it was 103 inches around. It was a tractor tire of some sort, but interestingly enough, it was marked 13 pounds. So, so those are the ones, right, that we have conversations about, that the shipper isn't necessarily super transparent, but that is, I would say that's probably one of the biggest ones. We also had a tree ship once.
Yep.
Yeah, like actual like tree in a box, like root ball and then the tree. You know, but we get
Full-size doors, canoes.
yeah, we had a door shipped from
mannequins.
Africa. Somebody, it was like a wooden hand carved door that weighed 260 pounds. And the customer actually didn't like it, so they wanted us to pick it back up and bring it back. So that one was, so those are some of the things. I think most common though, you're gonna get like your Wayfarers, your big box stores are shipping a lot of that MDF furniture. Sometimes that's just heavy. It's not super big, but that material of like a small desk is very heavy and dense. So those are pretty difficult to move. But in general, I think everything, you know, just everything's getting bigger. I think when Dave first started, I remember him coming home from work and he would like yell about a tire, right? Like eBay, somebody shipped one tire and he was like, I touched that thing 100 times today and moved it. Of course, it's the last stop. Or
Yeah.
like a carpet roll, maybe blinds, like, you know, blinds for a home, or maybe a 5 gallon bucket of pool chemicals, something like that. But like that was it. When we first started, we were home delivery when we first started. So that was like small residential packages, soft-sided bags, things like that. And now, you know, we're delivering sectionals from Wayfair, from Waydays. So it's just a little bit different on how things are. So you really do, you know, you can react to it or you can make a plan for it. So it's just two different ways of kind of, you know, taking on it. It's coming. So to be mad about it and, you know, get frustrated in the morning is not your best strategy.
Yeah, and it's really important just to understand that this is something not every shipper allows these really large packages, and FedEx uses it as a differentiator. So
Yeah.
not going away. Like this is a
No.
part of the model. And that's, you're right to say it, that, you know, this is something that, yes, I like when we're talking contractor to contractor, you can complain about it, but at the end of the day, when you're talking FedEx and actually being successful, it's more about what's your plan to get to, you know, to be successful with that volume, knowing it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And to your point, Josh, it's great point that, you know, sometimes people look at it and they say, what are they doing? How could they do this? But at the end of the day, they're securing volume for us. And that's those successes and those doors that are opening, though they may be a little uncomfortable today, they're going to open more doors for that reputation that we get back, where we're just doing better than our competitor and we're more flexible and we're more nimble. So those are the things that we could look at as a frustration, but our customers really doing their part to bring us the volume, and that's how we get paid.
Shipping doors to open doors, right?
Shipping giant doors to open doors, correct? Yeah.
But before we go too much farther, I think one of the things I know is a question I see all the time. Do they pay the same way for these larger packages that they do for smaller packages? And just kind of like, how does that, like, at least at a high level, what is
Yeah,
that?
so high level in your contract, you will have what's considered an LP rate. It's different for everybody. It's negotiated. So, our rate's different than everyone else's, but it is a line item that's paid differently. There is a percent that's paid on a percentage every month. And that percentage is a look back. We all love that term, but it is a look back, a monthly look back. So say like this month, I will go ahead and look at my settlement and my October percent of what considered was what fell in those minimum characteristics, right? Of what we considered a minimum or a large package. That number divided by the total number of stops comes up with my large package percentage. And then that percentage is applied for the next 4 to 5 weeks for the month. And then so on. So I hear a lot of times, like on the Facebook pages and things like that, where people are like, I'm doing more this month, or this box, like this tire was marked 13 pounds. I clearly probably didn't hit the, the minimum it should have hit, but it probably didn't. But at the end of the day, one package in that particular contract is not going to move the needle on that percentage. But if you find a shipper that is abusing it, you can definitely escalate that. And sometimes I escalate it just to stay in front of my terminal management and some of them, my representatives, that just to say like, hey, this is what my guy had to deal with today, or this is what my lady had to deal with today, just to kind of stay in front of them so that they know that these things are happening, even though it might not shift the needle that much on your actual payout if one box is mismarked. But it does add to the frustration when something is mismarked. The other thing is that sometimes, and you can check this against your like FCC, the scan, or even in Ground Cloud, you can check that sometimes when they go into like an inbound scan or a hub scan, it'll get corrected, because those the eyes and the scanners and the weights on the belts will auto correct and say like, no, that tire wasn't 13 pounds, right? So you can look, and just because the label was created by somebody in an office that said it was 12 by 12 by 12 and it weighed 13 pounds doesn't necessarily mean that the customer missed the mark on actually crediting you that large package. But so it's not like 123 Main Street had a large package and I'm getting paid for that stop. You're actually getting paid of a percentage of all the stops that you're doing.
Yeah, and this is easily probably the most complicated line item on the settlement statement, and it's not particularly spelled out. I mean, it is spelled out in a couple of places, but not in a way that's super easy to understand or parse. So a lot of people have questions on this and struggle with this. Is not it is a very common thing for people to ask this question.
Yeah, and there's a page, if you go to your LP history, your large package history rate page, it breaks out what your percentages were every month, and then you can match that against your settlement. It's very transparent. You have to go and find the data. But
and know where it is, because
I know where it is, correct.
migrant biz can be a pain to search and find stuff.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
But it is out there. It is out there. So, that's just that quick little calculation. But it's not actuals. I get that question quite a bit, that, 123 Main Street had the big tire and I didn't get paid at 123 Main Street for the extra money to deliver the tire. I'm gonna say, yes, you did. And the good thing is that the more stops you do, the more percentage, right? Your percentage is gonna, the percent of large packages is gonna get watered down, but the percent from the month before is gonna get applied to a bigger pool of stops. So the idea is that it's gonna shake out, right? The look back and the application forward is gonna shake out.
Yeah. Now, you've talked about it several times here, but if you do have those packages that are mislabeled by weight, or if it's a two-man load or something that isn't supposed to be on the vehicle, what's the process? What do you do? Like if you're, if this is the first time you ever see that, like, and you don't know how to escalate it, what are the next steps there?
Yeah, so I stay in very close connection with our SPS, which was the old BDS, and my terminal management. And I think the idea is just to let them know, when it's happening and if it's a specific shipper. So I try to gather as much data as I can so I can have a knowledgeable conversation with SPS and say like, hey, this shipper is constantly shipping 50-pound boxes, but they're marked 4 pounds. And I just, I get that I have to, I gave my guy a dolly and I gave my guy all these tools, and we're maneuvering the boxes, not deadlifting them and all this stuff. And, I have to send 2 trucks because the GVR, the weight of my truck is getting bogged down, all these different things that you can do. But at the end of the day, like I have to make sure that I'm getting paid correctly as well. So, that's a direct SPS. That's exactly what they're there for. But I always copy SPS and the terminal manager so that they know that both of them are on the same page. You're not going above one or, behind somebody's back. They're completely transparent with where your frustrations or questions might be.
And I'll tell you something really important you say there. So whether it's you as the owner or a BC, somebody needs to be plugged in and documenting it regularly, because one thing I've seen that's almost impossible to do anything about is if you realize, 6 months down the line that there's a shipper that maybe they've been doing it every single time for 6 months and you're just now realizing it, and you try to go back and say, well, they've probably been doing it for 6 months, but you don't have any kind of the documentation over time to show that.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to prove anything there, because
Yeah.
you just don't have that level of granular data to go back if you aren't recording it.
And definitely, double check again, check the ground cloud, check your FCC, make sure, go into Dro, go into your work area planner, and double check that it wasn't fixed on an inbound scan somewhere along the line, because that's the worst conversation, is to think you have your data and kind of poke, right? And go after somebody and say like, hey, this bulk isn't being paid. And they're like, yeah, it is. If you look on FCC, it's right here. It's 108 pounds. So you just want to make sure you have your ducks in a row. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. So now that some of kind of the definitions are out of the way, can you just kind of talk us through what your strategy has been for large package and bulk over the years and how it's kind of evolved over time?
You want to talk about how we used to do it?
Yeah. When it was just me, I just delivered it. I would have to make 2 trips to the terminal. I would go deliver my whole route, go back to the terminal, grab the big packages, go back out to my route because it was only maybe 20 minutes away, and I would deliver all that bulk in large package myself. And then we kind of evolved over the years, and we decided that we would have a helper to help me on, not a separate driver, but they would help me deliver, and we would kind of give them the larger packages, or maybe even just half my route, and that way it would give us both capacity, but that wasn't really efficient. So we tried that, and that didn't work.
We had BCs that would shuttle bulk, right? Like, just kind of say, oh, I can't fit this. So we would have the manager do it, but that was more of an interrupter, right? Like the manager had a plan that day and didn't know that all this bulk was going to come in. So now all his duties or her duties get shifted to the side because they have to go run bulk. And then we had kind of, and everybody has this, right? Like you hire a driver and they come on and they're not really delivering as many stops or to the speed that you want them to. So then what happens is you're like, okay, this guy is kind of maybe an underachiever or an underperformer, but reliable, right? Shows up every day, wants to do a good job, but just not capable of doing 100, 140, maybe even 80. So you're like, oh, bulk route, totally good fit, right? The guy only has to do 10 to 12 stops a day. That's it. And then he can help sweep pickups. So we for a small period of time actually had kind of the weaker link doing the bulk route. And then it just, it just didn't work. They were a weaker link, maybe for a better term, for a reason, right? So they weren't necessarily vested or diligent to come back and see if there was more bulk or or to deliver the bulk in a great way. Sometimes we had to have a jumper with the person because the bulk was so big and heavy.
We would plan their routes out for them.
Yeah, we would plan
because they couldn't route plan.
Yeah. So it was kind of, again, the weaker link. They were just kind of a driver getting boxes out to where we needed them to go. And it started to get really costly. We noticed that it wasn't efficient. It was, the bulk route that we created was conceptually a good idea as to get the bulk off everybody else to make everyone else more profitable. And that's the idea, right? In a bulk route, if you have a full bulk strategy and you move from kind of what Dave said, which is, two tripping, which is if you're not close to the terminal, not easy, or putting it on a manager, because that's also frustrating, even though that's their number one duty is to kind of do the catch-all. So about a year and a half ago, Dave and I were talking and we just said, what if we made this route, kind of took it from a 0 and made it a hero, right? And took it and we actually made it a supervisor route. So they're below our BCs, but above our leads. And we have a North territory. We kind of split it north, south, east, west, however we split it in depending areas. And this driver makes a plan. So we trap all the bulk into this route on Dro. And then we have a very strict policy with our drivers that you can't just leave bulk like this, right? Like nobody sees it. And then all the trucks leave and there's just giant boxes all over the dock. So our team leads and our bulk supervisor work together to make a plan. So in the morning, they decide, can the driver fit it? Can a driver in a truck nearby fit it? And then the supervisor has all the stuff that was preloaded on them. So it's a route in Ground Cloud. And then they come back to the terminal. So they do all the north, come back to the terminal, load up the south, and then they're available to do rescues, pickups, large sweeps, and things like that. But we did change the strategy to be more of a hero, somebody that was vested, somebody I say like this, the ship isn't sinking in the morning, but there's holes, right? When you first come in the dock, there's always, whether it's large boxes or missed scans or, FCC's down or whatever, Ground Cloud's not plugging in the way it should or whatever. And each hole, right, you need a finger and you're kind of like, plugging all these holes so that the boat doesn't sink. And that's kind of our bulk route. And because we call it a bulk route, but it is a supervisor route that really manages to the progress of the drivers, to bulk, these multi-box stops, anything that's kind of inconvenient. And we've kind of leaned that way. And for the last year and a half, it's been super successful. Because it's a supervisor role, it does pay a little bit more, but it's almost like a driving manager. Formally. So we get a lot out of them. Definitely vested, diligent, hardworking. But it is definitely a promotion to be in this truck instead of kind of where we used to have it as kind of like a catch-all or an afterthought.
Yeah, their stop counts are important. So they might only do 15 stops to start the day, but their truck's packed, jam-packed to the gills. And what that does, that takes some of that stress off our regular drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So they have room to work. They're not fighting the large packages, and they can navigate their truck more safe from a safety standpoint, from trips and falls.
Mm-hmm.
That they can get around their truck, and our bulk guy can go and handle it. And we also, one thing I say about the bulk route, we put the bulk route into a truck that's manageable, that can go out into the country, and that it can deliver stops, but it's still big enough that we can really pack it down. So we're using a P700 on that,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeps the 1000 out of the country, but a 700 is good enough that they can manage the driveways and just the things you see out there on the road whenever you're out there.
And again, it's a more senior driver, so they're safer, they have more experience with us. And because it's a promotion, it's not just, again, that weaker link, right? That you're just kind of plugging someone in somewhere because they can't, maneuver, they can't figure out how to get like a full route done. So again, it's not, it's a full strategy behind, the bulk route itself, and then why. And again, it makes every route in our terminal, all that are under our contracts, much more efficient, productive. Their morale is up, right? Because they don't have to worry about these big boxes. The bulk guy's not frustrated when he comes into bulk because it's his job. So he's not surprised by, oh my gosh, I got a big box.
And it helps the morale.
Yeah, and it totally helps the morale. So everybody, and people are willing when he says, like, I can't take this, I can't take this one, I can't fit it, or I'm not going that way. They'll make a plan because they know that they've been helped in the past by the bulk truck and that there's boxes on him that have already been pulled off. So instead of having the bulk sit behind your driver's truck and then put it on a, you know, physically move it, the drivers don't even see half of it, right? They only see the stuff that kind of comes in after dro and you know, makes its way last minute. And we make a plan for that, but it's nice when they don't have that, what we call like stop countitis, right? Where they come in and they're like, ooh, so many stops, so many big boxes, and they immediately get physically, mentally, and emotionally overwhelmed by what their day is going to look like. This bulk truck has completely taken a load of that off of them in the morning, and they don't even know it. They don't even see it. So it's really, really been helpful.
Yeah, perfect. There are a few questions in the Q&A about this. I'm not going to answer them right now, but just so you guys know, we will come, like, these are very specific questions about what you're talking about, and we will talk about it when we get to Q&A.
You got it.
Everybody who's in the Q&A, don't think I'm going to ignore your questions just because we move on. We will come back to them.
Yeah.
Now, a question I have, so, you know, as we head into peak season, do you adjust any of the strategy there? Does anything change around your bulk?
So we do a second bulk guy in the terminals. Well, I'll slice it. So in our small terminal, one of our terminals, we have express. And in each of our terminals, we do have a full-time bulk driver. And that is, it's again, dro sorts the bulk. We have it all trapped over in a route. And then they do extra things as well. At peak, we put another truck on because bulk is so just overwhelming. In some of our rural routes, the trucks aren't, you know, we don't have P1000s, P1200s. We have small 12-foot, 14-foot cutaways in some of those rural areas. So in our express terminal, our guy will do some 1030s, right? He'll take some of the 1030s off of kind of the stress off of some of our busier routes. He'll do bulk, maybe 2-trip, come back to the terminal, grab whatever was kind of left over, get that out there, and then he'll do 5 o'clock sweeps. So the boxes for express have to get back to the terminal before what we would consider the end of a day during peak. So that's one strategy that we do in that terminal. In another terminal, we have a manager that runs kind of our, I would call it a half a bulk route, right? So he does some of his management duties, and then his job is to catch any overflow from the bulk route. And then in our 2 bigger terminals, we're talking 34, 35 routes in each of those terminals. We put on a second bulk truck, and one of them is so busy, we put a straight truck on. And in the Cleveland market, we put a straight truck on, and that bulk guy does 2 things. He takes part of the bulk, but he also shuttles a chunk of stops to our heavier guys. So to the guy that's doing 300, 350 stops, but couldn't fit the last 50, he'll bring him his 1000s, or he'll bring him like a whole section. So that'll actually get shuttled out to him like around 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
So the strategic part of that is we use that bulk guy. We'll carve out chunks of routes that can be done in the dark safely with maybe like no driveways. So they'll have mailboxes, street lights, things that can be delivered in the dark, and it'll give that main route driver some capacity. I feel like we're keep circling around capacity, but it'll give him some capacity to move into work instead of having those extra 50 or 60 stops plugging up his day. We can just pull those. We'll load them onto that bulk truck. The bulk guy can go do the bulk for the first half of the day. The second half of the day, he meets drivers kind of all around each other, and he'll drop 50, 60 stops because those drivers have dug themselves out and they've delivered 100. So and they can fit another 50 or 60.
And it's still only 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
And they were able to get, 200 stops, 250 done by 2 o'clock because they weren't fighting, right? Their truck wasn't so packed that they weren't digging boxes out and climbing over things and having to get into the back and the side and everything. So having that walkway and being able to really maneuver and safely, kind of manage what's going on in your truck. But they want the volume, obviously, for holiday bonuses and things like that. They want to do the work. They just can't fit it all in the truck. And I'm talking, you're maxing out, 1000s and 1200s. So that's another strategy. And then in the other large terminal, we don't have those dense routes. It's really rural. So our bulk is run in, we have some minis. like the little NV smalls, and we kind of throw one or two stops and we send them, 50 miles away, or even further sometimes. But sometimes, I mean, that's the nature. That's kind of the good, bad, and ugly with a rural route is the boxes have to get delivered. And every day the stops continue to come. And if you don't have room for the swing set, the swing set it's a customer, right? So you consider it a loss leader, but at the end of the day, you have to get the stops done.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question from me before we go to a couple of things and then get to open Q&A. So, we've talked a lot about the big packages, the bulk packages, but on the other end of the spectrum, I know that you traditionally have stayed away from delivering through the alternative vehicle program, AVP. Can you just quickly talk through kind of your reason for that?
Yeah. So, and honestly, we've gone through this for years since it came up. There's been some contractors that have done webinars. We've taken classes. We've met with other contractors we were in Nashville and met a guy who runs like 30 of them a day. It was insane. We were like, what is going on? But between the way Ohio makes us pay and the way that our business is set up from rewarding and encouraging more teamwork and culture, having somebody that works kind of part-time and isn't really super vested, that soccer mom or whatever, and also not being in a branded vehicle is really not worked out for us. Every time we kind of go down the path of maybe this makes sense, we even had our managers had AVPs for a long time and we still didn't use them. It just didn't make sense for how we do business. I want to be able, if someone's done at 2:00 and somebody else is struggling, I want to be able to say, hey man, like Target needs a pickup. And you can't do that in the back of a minivan, right? You can't do that in the back of an SUV. So we also really rely on our vendors. From a safety standpoint, I mean, you can get an equal amount of trouble in a minivan as you can. And I know that they prove that, passenger cars don't get in accidents like we do, blah, blah, blah. But when we're talking about integrity and delivery integrity and all of these other things, safety and compliance and uniformity and things like that, it just works better for us to take the bulk off, stay away from the APV or the AVP, take the bulk off and let our everyday drivers, right, enjoy the small ones, right? The dense small ones. They're like, wait a second, you're gonna take all my light stuff. So now all I have is 40-pound Chewy boxes. Thanks a lot, Amy. But they're more profitable. I know when Dave used to deliver, he would like actually say like, oh yes, I'm finally like going into a neighborhood where I know I'm gonna get 30 stops off. And it was like a huge like chunk of encouragement that you're like, yes, I'm a third of the way done with my route, or I'm halfway done with my route. So from just an overall culture standpoint, it hasn't fit, along with a business structure. It just hasn't fit our model. And I know a lot of people do them and they're very successful doing them. It just doesn't, just the way that we've structured our business and our bonus programs and the culture of our team being, helping and being available. When you have an AVP that's done with their route, they're kind of not a resource for you anymore. They're kind of off the books, right? Where if somebody's in a truck and they're mine and they're my branded truck, I can kind of, and they're there for the day. They're already committed to be there for the day. If they're done early, I can kind of redirect them and help another team member.
Yeah. And, we traditionally didn't do AVP either. But like you said, I know some people who've been wildly successful. So
Yeah.
I think it's one of these things that it's really helpful to hear different perspectives, to hear how people have used it and how they haven't, so that if there's ever a scenario that might make sense to use it, it's a tool in your tool belt, but it might not fit your strategy, but it's nice to know that you have that option if it does fit your strategy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think that's what we wanted to cover on bulk and large package and a little bit of AVP. But we will, I'm going to go over our new listings for the week. And while I'm going through that, anyone else who has questions, type them in. I know we've already got a ton there, so we'll go through those in a second. But if anyone else has them, this is a great time to be typing while I'm going through these listings. So we have 6 new listings this week, 4 P&D and 2 line haul. The first one's out of Pennsylvania. It is 16 P&D routes at $1 million, and this has 23 employees and a manager, and it's really suburban operation with assumable truck debt, and pretty new vehicles as well. Next one's out of Western Indiana, 18 P&D routes at 1.3 million, 21 employees and 2 managers. And this one has, again, 2 full-time managers and spare trucks as well. Next one is out of Eastern Texas. This is 16 P&D routes at 1.27 million. 16 employees, 2 managers, and a fairly rural territory out in Texas. And then the last P&D operation is a larger one out of Texarkana area, 39 P&D routes at 4.1 million. This has 48 employees, 5 managers. So this is a really large operation if you're interested in that size and scale out in the Texas, Arkansas area. So from a P&D perspective, we've got Pennsylvania, Indiana, Texas, and then the really big one out in Texas, Arkansas area. Last 2 are line haul. So first one is out of Pennsylvania. This is 4 line haul runs at 1.5 million. It's got 8 employees, a manager, 2 dedicated solos and 2 unassigned solos. So it's kind of a good starting chunk of unassigned and solos and a manager out in Pennsylvania. And then the last one is out of Colorado. It's 2 line haul runs, $680,000. This has 3 employees for 2 dedicated solos. So kind of a nice starter size business out in Colorado if you're looking for some solos in Colorado. So Colorado and Pennsylvania for our line haul listings. And if you have questions on any of those, we just put a link in the chat where you can go and get all the details on any of those businesses. And then the last event I want to highlight, it's our last event of the year. We are having our last new investor summit for if you're still trying to figure out if this is the right space for you, in person in Nashville on Friday. So it's in 2 days. It's pretty full, but if you decide that you're going to try to squeeze in and make that trip and you haven't already booked it, reach out today so we can make sure you can make it. Otherwise, we will see you all next year. And all of our 2025 events, we're starting to post, and we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks of all the things we're doing next year. Okay, so let's get to Q&A. So I think the first one's an easy one. We'll start with that. So where do you see the details? Can you remind them on where you can, on the package, where it would be labeled as bulk? Like, how can you tell?
So David mentioned, you'll see packages marked with an FL, and that's floor load. Those are typically the ones that FedEx catches and will, deem as bulk. Also, as I mentioned in the historical info in your LP historical info page in MGB, you can go and you can see what those minimums are. So if you know that the pack, I know the minimum is 50 pounds. So again, there's no max, but if it's 51 pounds, you'll know that that one is clearly getting flagged for bulk. And I do think, as I see some of these questions coming through, I think people are, you do have a tendency to get caught up in that, as I mentioned, like stop, 123 Main Street, Joe Jones lives there, and he had a big box. I want to see where I got paid for that big box. And that's just not how it works in the system. That box will flag as an LP, and it will contribute to your percentage, but then the percentage is actually applied to all stops delivered that week. So again, floor load is the best way to take a look at it. Even if it's on a shelf, it could say FL. It just means that a package handler threw it on a shelf and didn't just floor load it. But yeah, and then again, I think it's length of the longest side has to be, I think it's 48. And then there's a length and girth, of the box calculation that they do. And then the 50-pound weight limit is also a flag.
And you can pull all that in DRO in the evening. You could pull it all and see it and organize it. You can pull the bulk, which is size, or you can pull bulk, which is package count.
Yep. And on the planner, you can actually sort by cube. So you can actually, if it wasn't trapped, you can actually move boxes also by route, if you see it.
Yeah.
So a couple different things to do in Dro. Very easy tool to swap around big boxes and trap automatically.
Yeah. So that was a question too. Yeah. Just in DRO, you can set kind of minimum limits where if the box is above that size, it automatically sorts.
Just like a smalls route, there's a LP route that you can.
We go in and manually move them too. Like we could set the perimeters, but we'll go in and some of our managers like to go in and manually build that route day to day.
Okay. Now, a question here, I think this one's hard to quantify because it's not always as direct, but when you're thinking about it, do you think that having that supervisor role that's paid a little bit more is saving you money versus the way you used to do it where you just had a driver? And how would you kind of think? I know it's probably a couple of intangibles and places that it adds and value in a few different ways, but how would you kind of think about that question?
Well, the bulk driver, he's good at handling packages. So he knows like he really exercises proper lifting techniques,
Yeah.
and dolly usage, and like using leverage and kind of angles to like slide the package out of the truck.
We call it maneuvering the
Yes.
box, not lifting the box,
It-
right? So
but-
that's a term that we use quite a bit, is maneuvering the box. But our bulk driver does not have a jumper. Our full-time bulk drivers do not have a jumper. Sometimes we have jumpers that at the holidays we rotate, and sometimes they get them. But I know two of our bulk drivers do not want jumpers at all. They say they slow me down, they get in the way, give them to somebody else, which is fine. But you're correct. The bulk route, now there's two different thought process. We did have a bulk route that would sweep large industrial pickups. Now that's an industrial route, not a bulk route. What I'm talking about is a rescue route, right? That's formally a strategy of how to get the big boxes that are on everybody's route out to them. If you have an industrial route, you can use that as a unique characteristic that there's, X amount of boxes and X amount of pickups, and they don't have a dock. So you can't, back up, and they can't palletize them and things like that. Like, those are all unique characteristics that's different than what we're talking about. So you're correct in the assumption that you're not being monetized. This is one of those efficiency models where our customer is they're going to trust us to strategize on what works for our business. However, the supervisor is doing a lot more than just delivering 18 big boxes, right? If it was just one guy that was delivering 18 boxes, yes, you would lose on that particular route. But when you look at your contract, your CSA, as a sum of all parts, right? And you're saying, okay, so the bulk route is a little bit of a loss leader because 1-for-1, I'm only getting paid for 18 stops and how many ever boxes. But now the capacity of my other 10 or 25 routes has now increased by 20 or 30 stops, right? So now those routes are much more profitable. Also, their service is much higher because one missed box out of 120 is still really good, still 99, right? Whereas if you have a bunch of routes that are lower, you miss one and you're kind of already in the tank. So it helps every aspect. And if you take a look at hiring also, right? So a lot of people can't handle the bulk, not only just from a physical standpoint, but from a really like a mental and emotional standpoint. It's just overwhelming. All the boxes are leaned up against the truck in the morning, and they're just like, can't process all of it. So from a morale and retention standpoint, if you think about how much it costs you to implement a new driver, not just from Indeed hiring, CT training, in-truck training, and then having that guy or girl in a truck until they're profitable. I mean, you're looking at 6 weeks, 8 weeks even, before they're actually profitable, right? Where you get some of that money back and they're on their own, completely independent. And if that's saving even one or two of those people throughout a season, you're already ahead. So you just have to look at your business a little bit differently instead of like a direct one-to-one relationship between this truck, the number of stops this guy does, and you have to consider this more like an overhead, like you would in any other business if you had marketing and advertising. We don't have that line item on our balance sheet that most businesses do. So we have a bulk route. And the bulk route is a supervisor, and he's constantly watching, making sure that people aren't failing. He's also looking at the DSW, looking if there's codes that are popping up midday. Why did you code this in 04? Why is this a 80, 27 already? If you're at the end of the day, like Are you going to go back for those missed scans? So he's managing a lot more. So again, changing that role from a zero to a hero, maybe just a body in the truck that was able to do 15 or 20 stops, was not what we needed at that time. And we did have to switch strategies. And this is just kind of blown it out of the park. And because they are doing stops, they're not doing a ton, they're doing their 15 and maybe, helping. Like today, our bulk guy helped we got slammed with stops today. Our bulk guy helped one of our newer drivers, took 52 off of him because he was done early. So 52 stops in a residential area, that's huge. And not necessarily covering full costs, but definitely doing his part, right?
Yeah, and I'd echo a few things you said there. One, for sure. So I think it's worth it looking at a route by route profitability to see certain things there, but a bulk route will essentially always lose money, and that's not something you agonize over. You're right in thinking and kind of talking through that these bulk routes add the efficiencies and values across the business that make everything else better. But just to underscore what you said about safety and insurance, if you're bringing in new people, not only will they burn out, but a workers' comp claim means you've lost that driver, you have to replace them, and you're paying for them. So there's a lot of kind of additional costs that can come if you don't treat this route properly. And I love the way you guys have talked about how you're doing it. So I just want to make sure to double down and kind of help people see that it's not just like, oh, that sounds like I'll lose more money on the bulk route, kind of, but it's because you're adding efficiencies and values across the business and preventing future costs.
Yeah. And we just don't look at that route that way. When we look at profitability, route to route, truck, fuel, labor, efficiency, box sizes, and revenue, and we do it route by route, this route is one of those that we don't measure that way. It's just not. It's more like a marketing. Honestly, it's more like a marketing budget in another business type.
Yeah. Now, question here, I think you kind of touched on it, but are there ever times you add a helper to the bulk route, and is it something you budget for, or is it a surprise? Like, how does that ever happen?
We don't. We train them to how to lift the packages and use a dolly. And if you think about it like this, once you go to a customer's house and you have a trampoline, you can always go and ring the doorbell and say, "Hey, I have your trampoline. Do you want it at your front door?" And they'll say, "Oh no, I want it in my garage." And they'll offer to give you a hand as well. So then it becomes a kind of two-man lift. And you get help. And they get it where they want it, so they're happy that you talk to them instead of just dumping it by their garage, and they have to move it by themselves. So you can really use the customer in your favor to help you get some of these things. And even bulk, like at loading docks and things, when we go to these big tire stops that go to these big tire shops,
their guys will help you.
They'll help us unload the trucks.
Yeah.
So we don't need to send a helper with that.
Yeah.
And we can utilize a helper somewhere else. Now, sometimes we may send a helper with our bulk guy if it's something unique. And
we did
and then we'll swap. That helper will then jump in with somebody once they're done with the bulk.
Yeah.
Or, they do what they need to with them, and we'll drop them off with a different driver.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, Ronald, I see here a few questions from you. We're going to get to some of them, but a lot of these are big questions that take a long time to answer. So before we jump into it, I just want to make sure one, we've got free one-on-one on our webpage. You can go and watch that. But I'd probably point you towards that new investor summit that I just mentioned. That's really what it's designed to answer, is a lot of these things of kind of these early big questions. They're not trivial questions. They really are important things to answer before you get into the space. But sometimes they take longer than we'll have time for in the last 10 minutes here. And we do have several of those coming up, or if you're close to Nashville, we can see you on Friday. We've also got full kind of consulting programs, both through acquisition and afterwards with Amy and Dave and the masterclass side to really help you operationally. So there's lots of ways we can help. We'll try to touch on some of them here, but I want to make sure you know that we may not get to all of your answers today.
Yeah, there's a couple deep ones in there.
Yeah.
A whole session just on that one.
So we'll start here. So and you got like 3 minutes, Amy. What's been a good approach to driver recruitment?
Hire good people, not just good drivers.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think that
literally it doesn't get any simpler than that.
What mediums do you guys use to recruit?
So we use Indeed as a funnel, but most of our drivers come from referrals. We have a referral program on our P&D and our line haul. Our line haul drivers have, you know, friends in the industry. Our P&D drivers, all of a sudden the guys are like, hey man, like I really like my job. I like where I'm at. And then, you know, they say, hey, I just got one literally while we were sitting here. And he's like, hey, my name's Tyler. Anthony sent me, said you guys might be looking for another driver this season. I landscape, so I have, you know, like time until March. I'm like, awesome, right? But literally, like these are coming through. And I think it's great because it's no BS. I don't have to sell anybody a bag of goods, right? About when you get referrals. Their trusted person told them the good, the bad, and the ugly about what we do. So it's kind of a more honest, you know, even playing field, even if it is, you know, the boxes are huge and I hate it here. At least they know what they're walking into. But yeah, so the majority of our new hires come from referrals. We do use Indeed, and we do not ask the basic, you know, can you drive? Have you driven? Those all come after. They're also on their resume, so I try not to, you know, duplicate, but I do ask them questions about caution and, you know, give me an example of when being careful really kind of, you know, put you in a situation to excel or kind of save the day. And when you get people that answer those questions, you know, I always know that if somebody's going to ask about benefits and tenure, like how long have people been, they start asking better questions. Those are really the good people. Anybody that's just like, when can I start? You know, might be one of those job hoppers. And we also do look at job hopping. And if I have a candidate that I'm really interested in, but maybe we're, you know, was it 2 or 3 jobs in the last year? I'll call them right out on it and say like, hey man, what happened here? You know, what was going on that you jumped around? And sometimes it was, I wasn't in a great space. Sometimes it's, you know, just didn't click. I was looking for something better. You know, or they might not have an answer and you know where that's going to lead. So I think those are just, you know, those are the platforms that we use, Indeed and referrals. There are some really good recruiters out there. I know Bright Flag, Tony Toby. I spent an hour on the phone with her. We do all of our internal hiring because we have the size and the capacity to do that, but she hires for the right people as well. So I think she's like, you know, if I had to go somewhere, that's somebody that I would trust because she has a lot of the same core values of hiring a person than I do. So it's kind of a, you know, but there's all kinds of places you can find, but referrals for me. You know, we've been doing this for a long time. So we have people that have been with us, you know, 9, 10, 11 years. So, you know, it's nice to kind of bring in birds of a feather. Birds of a feather.
I think we have webinars on it too, Ronald. You can go back, but I mean, recruiting and retention are 2 sides of the same coin that are, you know, really important, and it's a cycle that will never end. And pick up and deliver, you will always be recruiting. And same for line haul.
Yeah, and it's expensive though. So like I said, this bulk route and things like that, you just have to be creative to just not go for the, oh, I have to pay you more to retain you, or I have to offer benefits to retain you, which we do. And it is a trigger point for a lot of people, but some people don't need benefits. So having a bulk truck or having a relief valve or having a flexible schedule, some of those things are more important than kind of your traditional retention tools. So you kind of have to just think and be creative.
Okay, I'm gonna go through a few of these, Ronald, quickly and just try to hit at least the high level answers. So you asked, during the acquisition, does the business name have to change? Sometimes. Most of the time I would recommend yes. So asset purchase agreements are typically the way that we do these, where you come in with your own corporation and you are just buying the assets of the company and putting it into your new company. If you're buying the stock and the entirety of the existing company, you can do that and leave the name the same. But there are additional risks that come with that. You're inheriting everything, the good and the bad. You're inheriting any potential debt or lawsuits that exist with that company. So there's a lot more, there's some complicated skeletons in the closet that are harder to find. If you go through that method, there's some pros to it as well, and it can really speed up the process, but just know that we typically advise coming in with your own corporation. Insurance, what are the insurances that have to be in place? So there's 3 that are required, and then there's a couple that other people use that I would recommend. So the required are non-trucking liability, which the big thing in the FedEx space is that you're driving under FedEx's DOT number. So any liability of things that happen outside your vehicle, FedEx covers. But there's this non-trucking liability that covers anytime you're driving in the event that you're technically in the vehicle and not doing service for FedEx. So if you drove it, if one of your drivers drove the truck after their route to like their son's baseball practice and got into an accident, that's what non-trucking liability covers.
Even maintenance.
Yeah,
Even
maintenance.
Yep.
Yeah. They're rare and it's a really small policy, but it is required. Workers' compensation, which basically pays in the event that you have a driver that's injured in the workplace. And then the last one is employment practices liability insurance, which is basically in the event you or one of your drivers get into a lawsuit, it's a insurance coverage that protects you and kind of pays for legal fees. And then the last one is one that most people use but isn't technically required, which is physical damages insurance for your vehicle. So if your vehicle has any damages in an accident, you will have to pay for your vehicle's damages. And some people choose not to. They choose to kind of risk it. But for the most part, especially starting out new, I would have physical damages insurance protect your vehicles. And then there's a couple others that people use, but only those first three that I listed are actually required by FedEx. And you have to have them all before you can start. They will not let you start without them.
There's a doozy in there. You see that one?
Yeah, we'll talk about that one. I want to do one more of Ronald's, just so like a 60-second answer, Amy, on other technology used to optimize the efficiency of routes outside of what FedEx gives.
Ground cloud. Definitely. Especially in the express space. I don't think we could do what we do without a partner like Ground Cloud. And I know there's other routing.
Know the routes.
Yeah.
Know the routes. I know most of our routes in and out. So I can tell you what the efficient way is, where to cut them, and we know the terrain.
Yeah.
So just being present and on those routes, you learn them, and we live out here on some of our routes, so we know where to make the cuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So better understanding, and then that's a huge tool. Data's a great one. And then like a Ground Cloud, and then obviously Dro and WAP and all those things that they give you. But yeah, I think that's your best, your best tools.
Yeah. Okay, let's do this last one. Matthew, I see your question and I don't want to ignore it. So what Matthew said is he sees lots of talk about how FedEx could take your routes from you and you lose them even after you've invested money. And he's basically asking, how common is it for FedEx to do this? Is it something where, as long as you're doing well, you'll be okay? And I want to first just say, and then I'll let you guys chime in as much as you want to, but first say that it's not FedEx as a company's desire to just take routes away from people. It is FedEx kind of recognizes, and contractors like Amy and Dave have done a lot to help them realize that equity is important in this business, and contractors need to understand that they have value that's stable in this business over time, so that when there's change and things get tough, they'll stick through it because they know that their contract has value. What you're seeing a lot of right now is that we're in a very tumultuous change time where Express is happening, which is a very large integration across the board. And there's some things that are happening there where FedEx is looking with a closer eye on a lot of things in their network, because Express has a really different kind of customer expectation level that impacts how FedEx is kind of looking at some of the things that they have to enforce. And beyond that, there's also just kind of a reconciliation across the board where FedEx wants contractors to kind of hit certain standards that they hadn't always enforced effectively before. And some of that comes around the metals program, which sets certain KPIs and thresholds people need to hit. And there's also, there were some insurance changes that are kind of a reaction to high insurance fees that FedEx was paying, where they wanted to kind of enforce more of that at the contractor level. So there's always little reasons why these things happen, but I will say there are people that lose their routes. It does happen, and there's for a lot of reasons, but there's typically, in I'd say 95% of scenarios, it's a path that contractor has been on where there's certain things that have been kind of clear challenges in their business that they are unable to solve or repair, and have led them to be in a position where it's basically FedEx being forced to take those routes to make sure that the territory is safe. But I'll let you all chime in with anything there in the last 60 seconds on
Yeah,
it.
so I'm going to hit this really quick in several different ways. One, doing research online is like Googling why you have something wrong with your body, right? It's like the WebMD of resources. So not to Matthew to make you, feel like that's something bad, but any of the Facebook pages, there's a lot of ex-contractors on those pages. And just like anything, like we love what we do. And I'm not out there now, I am, but we weren't out there for years just making really positive Google posts about our experience here at with FedEx and in the contracts. So you're gonna get a lot of negativity just based if you start Googling stuff like that. So that's the first kind of caveat. Second of all, yes, they will do that to you, but it isn't a surprise. So we have weekly meetings, we have monthly meetings, we get data from our terminal managers all the time. We literally had a newer guy, we had a bunch of 85s, and they're like, dude, what's up with your service? We knew that within 1 week. So it's not like all of a sudden you're chugging along, and they're like, hey, by the way, we're going to take your contract. There have been signs, there have been formal letters, there have been formal meetings, and to be fair, they do give you quite a few opportunities to kind of turn things around, get involved. Now, I do know that this past year and a half has posed some really tough economic challenges on people which have contributed to the resources that they've been able to give to the contracts. So I think the big thing is just, make sure that you have capital to fix the trucks and to run your business outside of just like a sticker price, right? Like you have to be able to run the business. It costs money to run this business, but it is also a very lucrative business if you can, kind of streamline and work through it. So there is the good, there's the bad. I've heard some really terrible stories. And not all of them are the contractor's fault. And not all of them are the customer's fault. Sometimes it's just happenstance, or economic challenges, or, an accident, or there's all kinds of, to Josh's point, so many things that can contribute to this outcome. But to Josh's point, and I do want to just double down on this, which is they don't want to get rid of you. They need you, they need us, but they also need us to do what we say we're going to do, and not dig our heels in and do things compliant and do things to their service levels. And, just like anywhere else, we elect to be in the sandbox, right? With this customer, we've chosen this path. And it is very strict compared to some of our other competitors. The safety, the service things, but I wouldn't trade those things. They make my business safer and more stable in the end. But yeah, I mean, it's not an easy game, but it's a great one to be in. So, just again, I'm going to reiterate, just be wary what you read, and just know that it's not like a surprise. Nobody's just going to be like, haha, it's Tuesday, we're taking your routes. So all your money and all your trucks, you're screwed. That's just not how it is. So, and I know that there's people out there that, you go on Facebook and somebody says schedule L and it's like, oh, and it's like, brrr, like 9,000 negative comments, and somebody tees up another negative thing. And it's literally like, it's almost like a bad, reel, like TikTok reel. You can't get out of it. It's just like, oh my God, more negativity, just fueling. But it's not that bad. So I would encourage you to lean on contractors that are doing it right. And I'm not saying that we are 100%, we're learning every day. We have our own challenges. But we want to be here and we want to be successful. So find like contractors, find people, surround yourself with people that want to be here.
Yeah. And that's a huge reason of why we have Amy and Dave on here constantly. It's not to say like, oh, we just want to counter all the negative stuff by having a positive story and try to mute the negative stories. It's about finding contractors and people who understand there are challenges. Every industry has challenge. And our goal is to find ways to overcome them, be successful, and push for us all to be successful. In a lot of ways, the negative spiral ends up, if anything, hurting the contractor network. So this is just not about ignoring negatives, but seeing the challenges and working through them together to find the best ways for everyone to be more profitable and successful.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, with that, yeah, thank you, Dave, so much for being here this week and providing, all of your knowledge and experience. And for everyone who's on, thank you for being here. Everybody watching on YouTube afterwards, thanks for stopping by. And we will see you all on the webinar next week. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.